Good evening. Tony Lawson's my name, and I'm Chair of the Consumers Health Forum of Australia. As we start, as I reside on Kaurna land, I would like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of Adelaide. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this wonderful city and the broader Adelaide Plains region. I acknowledge the countries you are meeting on, and I pay respect to all elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending this meeting. We have just shared in Reconciliation Week, and I'm pleased to report that treaty discussions are about to recommence in South Australia. So the theme of the meeting tonight is why be a director on the CHF board? Well, what a good question that is. The Consumers Health Forum of Australia, or CHF as it's commonly known, is the national voice for health consumers. Since 1988, CHF has helped shape Australia's health system by ensuring consumers have a seat at the table. That work began with then Minister Neil Blewett, who said in his speech to CHF, "Without informed, knowledgeable and articulate health consumers, health policy will always be unbalanced, whatever the goodwill and idealism of governments and health providers. Mature consumer organisations are an essential part of the health." That still rings true today. CHF works across every part of the health system. We bring the voice of consumers, people using the health system every day, into health policy and reform conversations. We're independent, non-government, and funded through the Department of Health and Aged Care, whatever it is called today, as one of its key health peak and advisory bodies. We're recognised as the peak national organisation for health consumers. Last year, Minister Butler, who's continuing as the Minister for Health, said, "Thank you for the work that CHF does, and thank you for the work that every patient group does. I try to constantly remind myself of the importance of elevating the patient voice. Industry groups and clinical groups are very well organised and very well resourced and well intentioned, but we constantly have to work at elevating the patient and consumer voice. Your organisation is central to that, bringing together the dozens and dozens of patient groups, and thank you for that work." And we do this in many ways, such as having consumers provide commentary on each federal budget night. Consumer leader Sava said, "Thank you so much to CHF for giving me the platform to share my take on the federal budget 2025. We involve consumers in so much of our work, and after a recent piece of work on digital health, Ricky Spencer said, "Thank you, CHF, for providing spaces for us consumers to engage with health stakeholders in improving the care outcomes for the whole community and positioning health equity as a core priority." So that gives you an overview, a brief overview of CHF and where we stand. Now, the question is what is different about being a board director? Being on a board is different from working in a staff role, being an advocate or serving on a committee. It involves a distinct set of skills, things like understanding governance frameworks, fiduciary responsibility, financial oversight, risk management, and long-term strategy. Directors are legally and ethically accountable for the organisation's health and integrity. That's why it's not a role to be taken lightly. At CHF, we welcome people with a range of backgrounds. You don't need to be an expert in governance to begin with, but you do need to come in with a willingness to learn and some grounding in strategic thinking and responsibility. However, to have a good understanding of our health system is also a big plus. We support new directors with induction, peer learning, and ongoing development. But that foundation of understanding what it means to govern, not just advise or advocate, is essential from day one. So what does the CHF board look like? CHF has a skills-based board of up to 9 directors. 6 are elected by our voting member organisations, and up to 3 may be appointed by the board. These appointments help balance the skills and experience we need, and we take a snapshot at a particular time and keep an overview of what our skills and experience base is and what we need to cover off on those. And sometimes we say we don't actually need a board director per se. We might be able to buy in the skills and expertise we need, resources willing. Directors bring a mix of capabilities, including, obviously, consumer engagement and participation, health policy and systems, health service management, patient safety and quality, medicines and health technology assessment, Medicare and private health insurance, finance, law, marketing, governance, and strategies. So it's quite a comprehensive list of things, but we don't expect everyone to be across all those elements. For elected directors, terms are 3 years, with a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. And these directors are required to be renominated after their first 3-year term expires and then stand for re-election if that's their desire. Appointed directors are also eligible to be reappointed for a further 3 years after their initial 3 years. So that's the governance background. What's the work of the CHF board? And we're no different from a lot of other boards, but in our terms, our board sets the CHF strategic direction and ensures that the organisation remains financially sound, well-governed and future-focused. To assist the board in its work, we have 2 standing committees, a governance committee and a finance, audit and risk management committee. And sometimes we form short-term working groups when needed. Directors are encouraged to join at least 1 committee in addition to their board director role. Board meetings are held up to 6 times a year in a mix of virtual and face-to-face formats. That rhythm allows time to engage with members, stakeholders and senior leaders in health, including ministers, the Department of Health and sector partners. The board also plays a key role in reviewing its own effectiveness and composition, ensuring that we remain fit for purpose. While the time commitment and involvement of directors is not onerous, we do meet 6 times a year as a board, and subcommittees meet on a regular basis. And we do expect that directors will be appropriately prepared for all meetings and to participate in strategic discussions and be familiar with all the work of the board and have an appreciation of the work of the CEO and Secretariat. While our current funding base is appropriate, we are always looking to diversify our funding and not to be totally as reliant on government funding. But this is not an easy process, as we do not have discretionary funding or resources to dedicate to this. In principle, it would be great if we could speak more authoritatively and independently if we had alternative funding. So the board can't do its work on its own, and we're supported by the CEO and the Secretariat. So what does our team look like? Our staff team is made up of around 20 people, and that can fluctuate depending on what projects we're being funded for and what the headcount is required to undertake those projects. Those 20 people work under the leadership of the CEO, and we have 4 directorates: finance and corporate, people and culture, advocacy and engagement, and policy and research. I will be asking our CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Deboney, to say a few words about the organisation shortly. So what's ahead for us? We've achieved a lot in the 35+ years. Consumer voices are more embedded than ever before in health policy and service design. But it's not universal. Tokenism still happens, and many communities remain underrepresented. The challenge for CHF now is to deepen our impact, especially in new areas of reform. That means showing what good consumer leadership looks like, holding the system accountable, and forming bold, values-driven partnerships. And we need a strong strategic board to help guide that work. So who can nominate? All financial voting member organisations of CHF can nominate candidates for election and vote in the election. This year, the call for nominations open in August 2025. If required, an election will be held before the annual general meeting, which will be held on the 29th of October 2025. A formal notice will be sent to all members with details on how to nominate and promote this opportunity. The board also keeps a constant lookout through our advocacy work and our various networks for potential directors to be appointed based on our skills and experience base at particular time. And we continue to do that. We thank you for your interest in being part of CHF's leadership. We're glad you're here. I would now like to ask our CEO, Elizabeth, to say a few words about the organisation and a brief overview on some of our current work. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Tony. I'm just having a slight problem with my video that was working fine before, but now doesn't want to start. Just give it one more second. Otherwise, I'll start chatting and keep. Oh, there we go. Yay. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Tony. I've been lucky enough to work with some strong chairs over the years. Stands out alone as the most tenacious, and possibly the most stylish. So it's great to work with you, Tony.
Thank you.
So Tony asked me to say a couple of words about being a CEO in the not-for-profit sector, as well as kind of where to from here for CHF. So people often join not-for-profits because of purpose. They want to make things better. They feel some kind of connection with mission. And that's, of course, what drew me to the work I do, and indeed most of our team. I care really deeply about making systems fairer, more responsive, and that's part of what CHF tries to achieve. Of course, we're a not-for-profit organisation. So for those of you that have worked in this space before, we often say we work on the smell of an oily rag with no oil and no rag. It can be tough. So leading in this space is about holding the tension between our ambition and our limitations. We want to drive systemic change, but we're working within tight budgets and tiny teams. Unlike government or industry, we don't have huge branches that do strategy or communications or governance and the like. But we're expected to deliver these things, and often to the same standard as others who have much more resources than we do. So a culture at the board level and within the organisation is really critical to our success. We rely on trust, our shared mission values, and good governance to hold the work and each other to account. And as CEO of CHF, one of the key parts of my role is creating conditions where talented people like our board directors can contribute fully without burning out. So I think, you know, if I was choosing board members, I'd love people who ask great questions, who are really generous with their knowledge, and also understand that operational boundary. What is governance and strategy and what is operational? Curiosity is fantastic. People being clear and, to be honest, a shared sense of humour. Because sometimes things get tough. Tony often talks about optimism being important. I often think a sense of humour is important too, because sometimes we're looking at the absurd. And our work moves really fast and sometimes unpredictably because we're at the whim of government. So it helps to have board members who hold that complexity and stay oriented to the bigger picture while things change sometimes on a monthly basis. So the current policy environment. Well, with the shift of disability into the aged and health and aged care, we've effectively added another major reform agenda into what I would say is an already stretched portfolio. The Minister himself has multiple new stakeholders, got new assistant ministers to, you know, build relationships with, new staff transitioning both in his office and also across the department. So we may not see any major signals for a little while. So we may need to be just a little patient after a lot of announcements during the election campaign. In the meanwhile, our role as CHF will be to keep asking, will any of these reforms or these changes improve people's lives? Will it make care more accessible, more affordable, more inclusive, more responsive? Because that's what we know the community wants. Labor's strong re-election opens a window for deeper reform, not just pilot programs or efficiency tweaks. But so far, the government's health commitments, though large in terms of dollars, they're cautious in terms of reform, largely focused on repairing the existing system, not reimagining it. And when we talk to consumers and partner with them, they are reimagining the healthcare system. So this will be an interesting next question for government. How far is it willing to go in reimagining and working with the community to design the healthcare system that we all want to have in our country? So consumer and community voices are really critical here. We can bring insight that doesn't always show up in data or in lobbying briefs. Our voice is unique, it's diverse, and it's essential. So the question for us will be, is the government ready to listen to all of this, and whether we as a sector and CHF representing its peak members are ready to speak clearly, together and often. So I'd say to you, for those of you that are interested in joining a board like ours, good to think about why and what kind of legacy you're hoping to leave. Our work can be messy sometimes, it's always meaningful, and many times there are moments where your voice really makes a difference. You won't get stock options, so just putting that out there right now, no stock options available, but you might just help us create a system which works better for the people. And I think that's why we're all here. Thanks, Tony.
Good, thanks, Elizabeth. There will be opportunity for questions, and I noticed that people have popped some questions in the chat already, and we'll get to those. I'd also like to ask our Deputy Chair, Rowan Cockrell, to say a few words about board functions, and then to say a few words about our farm committee in the absence of our chair, Jan Donovan, who is an apology tonight. Over to you, Rowan.
Thanks, Tony. Look, I think in regard to what I was going to talk to was the farm committee, which Jan Donovan was unable to attend tonight. And I think that probably people's experience in a peak body or in organisations that have got a farm or a finance committee are well aware of their responsibilities. But I think the important thing is to understand that this is one of the committees, the standing committees of the board, that is really important in informing the board and reviewing all the information that fully informs to the board meetings. So the, you know, as Elizabeth says, we've had quite challenging years over time, and that's normal for peak bodies, and even more so nowadays. I think the important thing is that you've got people that feel comfortable and understand financial positions of organisations and are able to contribute in their own way to supporting the board and the organisation in moving forward. With the farm meeting also it's a committee of about 6 people, and it will be transitioning with a new chair next year. There is always we have one non-board director on the committee, but the remainder are board directors, and I would say that all board directors are encouraged to contribute in some way to one or other of the subcommittees in order to create that sense of support to the board and to fully inform future decisions that need to be made. So I think that to understand the farm is to feel comfortable with understanding the processes, but also to be willing to learn if not confident. And certainly there is a support both internally within our organisation, but also within the other committee members to learn how the finance committee works. So that's really important. Tony, what you wanted me also to talk about?
Just to talk a little bit about what your impressions of the board and how it operates.
Okay, I've been on the board for probably a little bit less than Tony. So Tony is finishing with us very sadly at the end of this year as part of his tenure. I have another year to go, but I've seen 14 years of the Consumer Health Forum in my directorship, and I have thoroughly enjoyed every part of that tenure. And I think the important thing is I've seen a lot of growth in the organisation, a little bit more stability. We are very privileged to have Elizabeth with us. She is really taking the organisation to the next level. And I think that what I like about this board is it's very inclusive, and it's very much conversations and dialogue between equals. It's not driven from top down. It's a discussion, and decisions are made through consensus, but also participation at all levels. And so I really enjoyed being a board director, and I have 1 year to go, and I will endeavour to, I just love participating everywhere I can. So it's been a real learning to begin with, and some people may start quite, for want of a better term, green, and if they do, there is support in that regard. But there may be others that have got experience on other boards that would have something they feel would be of value and could contribute, and I would encourage people to apply and see whether they can find a way to contribute to the moving force that is now happening with consumers.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Just wanted to add, in terms of the membership of the Farm Committee, we do have an independent person on that board, as on the committee, as we do on the governance committee. And for instance, the person on the Farm Committee is a qualified accountant and has financial background experience, and the person on the governance committee has a lot of governance background as well. So we are able to draw on people in that way as well. Thanks, Ryan. That's great. I'd now like to ask the chair of our governance committee, Daryl O'Donnell, to briefly describe the work of the governance committee and some of the key issues we're looking at there for the moment. Thanks, Daryl.
Tony, thank you. I'm actually still a bit thrown. Elizabeth's pointed us to the fine print that there's no stock options, and I think that will have thrown a few of us. But for those of us who are on the governance committee, we're there for the love of consumer health and for advancing the consumer health movement. So all of us on the board as directors come to the board with something that's connected us to as individuals to an experience of healthcare where we've seen the reality of the world as it is, and have said it can be better than this, and we want to see the changes that put us people at the centre of a system which often feels like it's driven by professionals or by funding. And so that care for consumer health is right there across the board and right there across the governance committee. But particularly for the governance committee, what we're doing is thinking about the health of CHF as an organisation as well. So in order for us to have a strong consumer health movement, we need strong consumer health organisations, including CHF. So what does CHF's governance committee actually do? Well, it's an advisory committee. It doesn't actually make decisions itself. It takes the time to chew over and to deep dive into issues on behalf of the board in accordance with its terms of reference, so that it can then make recommendations to the board for the board's consideration. So it doesn't actually make the decisions itself. It looks at the issues and then provides advice on those for the boards. And it does so across 5 different domains. The first is board membership and succession and performance. So that's really the sorts of things we're doing tonight, providing a space where people who might have an interest in the life of CHF can hear about its work and hear about how to step forward if you have an interest in being involved in the governance of the organisation. Our second role is to support the chair, Tony, with the CEO's employment. So for any board, looking after your CEO, making sure that the CEO is supported in their employment, rewarded, valued, and that we're thinking about the sustained relationship with the CEO over the long term in what can always be a challenging gig. That's a very important role for a board and one that the governance committee supports Tony with. We have a role in corporate governance, making sure that the organisation has up-to-date corporate policies. We don't need to worry about every policy that an organisation might have. Many of them are managed through Elizabeth as the CEO and by her team. But there are some corporate policies where it's absolutely vital that the board signals from the top expectations. That could be about behaviours, for instance, through the code of conduct. It could be about delegations. For instance, the board needs to authorise Elizabeth and through her, any of her nominees, to actually make particular decisions that allow for the organisation to work effectively. And those delegations are set out by the board so that the CEO has the appropriate authorities to be actually able to do their job and to not be overly encumbered by needing to come to the board for decisions that they're perfectly capable of making themselves. So that's our third area, corporate governance. Our fourth is membership. At the moment, we're really stepping into the process of looking at how we go about assessing applications for new members. So when an organisation, someone from an organisation comes forward and says, we really want to be part of the life of CHF, we need as an organisation to have steps in place that as a board allow us to consider, is this organisation a suitable organisation to become a member of CHF? Do they have the right values? Do they have the right ethos in relation to consumer participation? Is there anything about this organisation about which we should be concerned in terms of its reputation or its performance or its engagement with consumers? And so the governance committee will have a look at those issues and then advise the board on whether that organisation should be welcomed as a member of the organisation. And then finally, the fifth area is general meetings. So we have an annual general meeting every year, which is the opportunity for members of CHF to be part of the governance of the organisation, to exercise their voting rights at an annual general meeting. And it's the place where the board is held to account for its leadership of the organisation. So the board at the annual general meeting is there for members to be able to ask questions and to be able to make sure that it's hearing from the members what the members wish the organisation to be prioritising and doing. And so that annual general meeting is a really important part of the democracy, if you like, of the organisation. And the governance committee makes sure that the preparation for the annual general meeting is seamless and that the paperwork goes out as it should, and that people are able to participate in that forum. So those are the key functions. Just briefly, in terms of the burden, if you like, the effort, the Governance Committee meets 6 times a year for about 90 minutes each meeting. And so members of the Governance Committee would attend each of those 6 meetings, about 90 minutes during work hours. And there's a little bit of reading in advance. I couldn't imagine it being more than 90 minutes in advance of a meeting. So all up, that would be 90 minutes of preparation, 90 minutes of attendance at a meeting, maybe 3 hours a month, in addition to being a part of the life of the board. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks very much, Daryl. That was really good. Okay, now's the opportunity to canvass questions. I've asked Elizabeth to moderate this for us, and I've seen a number of questions come up on the screen through the chat. So, Elizabeth, would you like to guide us through that, please?
Very happy to, Tony. So there are a few questions. Just a heads up, I can see some there for you, Daryl, some for you, Tony, and Rowan. So just letting you know. Folks, keep adding your questions in. We'll start with the ones we've got. So, Rowan, I might start. This is an easy one for you because you're representing Jan, if you want to pop your camera on. Someone's just asked if we get Health Peak Advisory Body funding. So I thought that was an easy finance question to ask. Do we get HBAB funding?
And I can happily say yes. Really important, and I think there's various aspects to that funding. Is number one, it's very good to have the funding, but number two, it also recognises the organisation as the peak body, and we will continue to endeavour to maintain that for as long as possible, whilst the aspect of where that funding comes from could change in the future for the government, but it is a great benefit to us at the moment.
Great, thanks, Rowan, and thanks for your question, Chris. So, Daryl, I'm going to throw to you for the next question. Michelle and Paul have asked some questions about people coming onto the board and our nomination process, technical. So I'm hoping you're happy to wander through the Constitution and explain particularly the notion of how do you get nominated, and we changed our Constitution just recently, if you're not a member of a member organisation. A member organisation has to sign the form, but let's say I wasn't a member. Can I still get nominated, and what would you recommend I do?
That's a great question. So for some of the people who are here tonight, you'll actually be able to see on our website who our member organisations are. You might be a staff member, you might be a board member, you might be a member, a friend of one of our member organisations. That makes it really easy. So, for example, you're a staff member or a volunteer or a board member of an organisation that is a CHF member, you'd be able to ask your organisation to endorse a nomination if they thought it was appropriate for you to be considered for election to the board. But if you're not part of a member organisation, it can be a bit trickier, as Elizabeth said. And one of the things we're very conscious of is that it's a really tough time for consumer health organisations around the country. Not every state and territory has an organisation that people who care about consumer health can step forward and say, this is my state organisation. And so people can sometimes look to CHF as the sort of proxy, if you like, for the gaps that we have in consumer health movement around the country. But regardless of where you are, if you're someone who's passionate about consumer health, if you've got experience that would be relevant to the work of CHF as a consumer, if you can demonstrate, I've been part of these advisory processes, or I've been involved in research governance as a consumer, or in whatever way, if there's something that connects you to the consumer health movement, my first recommendation would be to reach out to any of the organisations that are CHF members in your jurisdiction. That could be the peak health consumer organisation, Health Consumers New South Wales, for example, or it could be another organisation such as NAPWA, the National Association of People with HIV. But if you can identify an organisation that's one of our members who might be receptive to an approach from you, whose interests and work aligns with the sorts of contributions you've been able to make. In the first instance, you could reach out to them to say, I have this interest. Would you be willing to consider nominating me? This is who I am. And they might ask to catch up for a meeting to get to know you a little bit better. They might ask you to share your CV or some other details that would allow them to make a decision about, yep, this is absolutely the sort of person that we would like to put forward for CHF's board. But if you do feel stuck, if you're not quite sure who to approach or how to make that approach, then my first suggestion would be, my other suggestion would be get in touch with CHF and let us know that you're interested, so that we can actually work with you to provide that pathway, if you like, to someone who can assist with putting that nomination forward. So don't hold back feeling as though that's an impenetrable barrier. There will be a way through it, but we're happy to assist with that on a case-by-case basis for anyone who has an interest.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And people could also express interest to be appointed through that process as well, because we don't know all the good people that are out there. Back to you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Darryl, for that great explanation. As a peak body, we have member relations and they're integral to us, and so we ask them as our voting members to form our board. We appreciate that if you're not engaged with one of those members, as Darryl said, you might need to do a bit of speed dating, get to know some people. But if you're a consumer advocate, the chances are you're already working with at least one of our members, if not directly, but indirectly. So hopefully you've got an in somewhere. Now, Tony, I've got a question for you now. This one's from Karen, who asks, do we think that our funding, and I assume you mean, Karen, and correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, the fact that our funding is in any way restricts our policy positions?
Yes. It could always be more. As we have already covered off on, we do receive peak body funding from the government through the department. That's about $600,000 a year. It's nowhere near enough to support our base, and we continue to advocate for that to be increased. Where the way that decisions are made about what organisations should receive through that process is a mystery, and some organisations get funded far less than we do, and some organisations get funded far more than we do. But we continue to make our case on our own behalf. But the bulk of our funding does come through project-based funding. More often than not, we are able to use those projects to develop our own policy positions. We are quite creative in being able to do that. We have pretty articulated policy positions anyway. The government and the department know what our position is in a lot of areas, but from time to time, and lots of time, in fact, we do consult with our members and our stakeholders to clarify, to enhance what our positions may be, so that we can advocate more effectively with the department and the government. But you know, who would ever say we've got more funding than we know what we can do with? We need more funding, absolutely. But yes, there are tensions from time to time where we are asked to do some things, sort of a bit, you know, machinery, a bit admin-y, but there you go. You take the good with the bad. Thanks.
And Karen, I would add, I'm regularly in the media criticising the government in one way or another. So yeah, we need to be careful because we're government funded. By the same token, our role is to be the voice of the community. And if the community is unhappy with something and our members are unhappy with something, it's our job to say that this, whatever's happening, doesn't align with community expectations. We always do it respectfully because we're trying to build a long-term relationship with the government, because they're the ones that are often, the system changes. And so we want them to see us as a trusted voice who they can come to and hopefully work with in partnership to make those important changes. But that doesn't mean that I'm not known in the department for my frank and fearless advice. Although the ministers, I haven't had ministers in the past, not only this one, say, I always know you'll tell me what you think, Elizabeth, with a look on their face that suggests perhaps they'd like it sometimes if I didn't tell them exactly what I thought or what I think the community wants. Thanks for that question.
Can I just add to that, Elizabeth, that as Elizabeth said, we always provide respectful and constructive advice. You know, you can be a one-trick pony and criticise the government for whatever they might be doing, but whenever we're constructively critical, we always come forward with a solution or solutions to issues that they may be confronting. And we obviously always say, well, and we can help you with that. So that's another string to our bow. And as I said in my overview, you know, we would love to be able to identify and receive alternative sources of funding so that we're not as dependent on the government, so that we could speak more authoritatively and independently on key policy issues. That's an argument and discussion for another day, but that's always on our agenda, and we're always looking for an opening of how we might do that.
Tony, would you mind just perhaps talking a little bit about this notion we have of independence too? So in our history, we've not taken money, any significant money from sector. So whether it's big pharmaceutical companies or medtech or our health insurers. And could you talk a little bit about why perhaps we do that? Because obviously, if we were willing to take that money, we wouldn't have the issues around a new conundrum.
Yeah, well, I guess it's quite a it's a vexed issue in some ways, but it's also a simple issue, if that does make sense. In that, as Elizabeth indicated, we will not accept money from Big Pharma. And we won't do that because we do feel that if we did that, well, it would make day-to-day life easy for us. It would make our position as a credible, independent, respectable organisation place it in some jeopardy, because we would not be speaking as an independent body, that we could be seen to be beholden to other organisations with their own vested interests. You know, like we wouldn't take money from the Pharmacy Guild, we wouldn't take money from private health insurance, and that's quite deliberate, because we do feel that that would jeopardise our very hard-fought independence. And let me tell you, having been involved with the organisation for as long as I have, it's so hard to build credibility and respect. It's so easy to scrap it and smash it by making decisions and being seen to be something, purporting to be something that you may not necessarily be. So that's the cornerstone of us, as hard as it might be. But it's also easy, as I said.
Yeah, thanks. Lana says there's a conflict if we went with private funding. That's true, Lana. We kind of have a conflict no matter what we do. If we were crowdsourced, then there might be community views that we might not think we agreed with. Wherever you go, there's always likely to be a conflict or an interest that you need to take into account. And the question for the board is always, which ones of these are important? Which ones are they comfortable with? And which ones are they not? And then they provide that guidance then to the management team, and then we operationalise those views. Daryl's got his hand up too.
I think I want to build on what both you, Tony, and Elizabeth have just said. Then that there's really choices here, in organisations in the not-for-profit sector all face this challenge. Where does the money come from in order to do the work that we're here to do? And for us as an organisation working nationally, some of the major areas in which we're active include primary care. So what's happening, whether it's general practice or other parts of the primary care system, which can include a focus on prescribing, what GPs are prescribing in terms of medicines, the work of pharmacies in dispensing medicines, the cost of medicines, which we all know is a huge issue for Australians in a cost of living crisis. So lots of work in the primary care area, and also lots of work in the regulatory space. So in the decision making by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, for example, about which medicines and which medical devices, tests, and other sorts of medical devices which are approved and how quickly they're approved. And again, that's a very, very challenging, technically complex space in which all of us want access to the right devices and medicines when we need them. We also want them to be safe. And there's a set of trade-offs there that are particularly important for us as an organisation that we navigate, similarly with the funding of medicines and the funding of medical devices. So all of those areas are areas that CHF specialises in. Of all of the national organisations working at a peak level, the bread and butter in some ways across so many things that we care about, those are spaces that CHF particularly excels in. And you might have seen Elizabeth was very active recently during the controversy around 60-day dispensing, which has made medicines cheaper for millions of people, and somehow became controversial in the lead up to that decision being fully implemented. But Elizabeth, against a lot of very, very strong professional and other interests, stood up for consumers in saying, from a consumer perspective, we need medicines to be cheaper. We not only saw that reflected in the 60-day dispensing decisions that flowed through, but actually then in the government and the opposition's decisions prior to the election to commit to making medicines more affordable. Because we work in those spaces, it's so important that we not be in any way able to be questioned about our independence. And it's that directness of our role that matters here. Lots of other not-for-profits that work at a greater distance from the regulatory system, from primary, will make a different choice about how they engage with pharmaceutical companies, with medtech. And accepting funds is no bad thing if you're putting them towards your mission to actually get more for your communities. So, but that's why we as an organisation can't accept those funds, because our independence on those issues is so critical.
Thanks, Darryl.
Thanks,
Okay,
Darryl.
Elizabeth, any other questions?
Plenty more questions. So I'll pass this one to you, Rowan. This is just a general question about time on the board. That is, how much time does it take? So if you're a director, not the deputy chair, we've got board meetings, how long do they go for? Do we do them virtually or face-to-face? If, does it take you 3 days to read the board pack? Do we need to allow for that? And if you're on a committee, what kind of time commitment is it? Darryl said it's a 90-minute meeting, but again, is that 3 hours of prep and then the meeting, or is it really just like 95 minutes? And give a sense to people like what kind of time commitment they're looking at.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think that for each, if we talk about the committees working on a similar a base, so you've got these subcommittees, but also the board. So the board is meeting, 6 to 7 or 8 times a year. It really just does depend on what is actually happening at the time, but we are based on meeting a minimum of 6. We do try to have face-to-face meetings at least 50%. It does vary again depending on what's happening with all the directors and where we all are and what states we are. I do like to think we're almost covering all states at the moment, which is nice, and we have a director from Western Australia now, and we haven't had one for a while there, so that's great. I think the time taken to attend is so for the board meetings are always at least when they're face to face, we take advantage of this and have it for at least a day. And when they're virtual, we try not to be on the computer for that long, but we sort of target the content of the meeting to be adapted accordingly. So it might be a 5 or a 6 hour with a break meeting, depends on whether we can get it down a bit. Preparation for a day meeting is, and we fly to different states depending on where so we've been in South Australia, we can go to Canberra, we're in Melbourne in a couple of weeks. So it varies each meeting, we try and flex it around. Preparation is reading content on an online application, very easy to use, and I think that reading it is really a bit dependent on how comfortable you are reading that sort of paperwork. And I think that, you know, the papers can be up to, you know, 80 plus pages, but they're also content that you will, as board directors, get used to it, and you can also get used to reading the content and work through it and become more familiar with them. It takes less time, but there's probably at least a couple of hours in reading it to make sure you're well and truly across it. Subcommittees are much less. They meet about 4 to 5 times a year, depending with the farm. Also, the finance committee, they also have a budget to review, so that's really important. And so again, the meetings for the subcommittees might go for an hour to an hour and a half, but I also know that it probably takes at least an hour to read thoroughly, minimum an hour to perhaps read through the minutes, but they're not, it's not undoable. And so whilst there's an expectation to be on at least one, it's doable, but you do need to allocate time for reading the information. You need to come to meetings having read your papers, otherwise meetings get slowed down by people not understanding the discussion when it comes up. So that's really important. Yep.
Great, thanks, Rona. Thanks, Samuel, for the question. One quick one for you now, Tony. If someone works in the health system or perhaps as a health professional, can they still apply for our board?
Once again, as has been explained, they would need to, as an elected person, be nominated by one of our members. They would, depending on where they work and the sort of work they do, they would have to be aware of conflicts of interest. It's not a yes or a no, but there may be issues that came up in a board meeting where we might say, and that we always conscious of declaring conflicts of interest. And as chair, I asked the board before a meeting, do people have conflicts, feel as though they have conflicts of interest on any of the items? If not, but if there's a matter that comes up in general discussion where you think you might have a conflict of interest, please just declare that, and we can decide whether there is a conflict and whether you need to be excused from the meeting or whatever. So it's not a yes or a no answer, but as an elected member, as I said, you would need to be nominated by a member organisation. If you felt that you could make a good contribution as an appointed director, then it'd be a matter of pointing out your credentials to us, and we would have a discussion and cover off on those interests of any potential conflicts of interest or whatever. But it's not a yes or no.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Now, one for you, Darryl. Paul asked a question about individual members, you know, the sense that as an individual, I might have a lot to offer the board rather than someone who comes through a member organisation. So I thought you might like to talk a little bit about, you've kind of talked about our process for elections, maybe the appointments process, and how the board might be, if you've got a discrete set of skills, that might be how the board could see you could create a lot of value.
You think that to me or to Darryl?
To me, I think. But Elizabeth, you were just breaking up a little bit there. You were mentioning individual membership, individuals who bring a lot of lived experience, a lot of who are really invested in consumer health, but may not be connected to organisations. But I missed the second part of what you were saying. Yeah,
I just said that, you know, often the appointments process might be helpful for those people if they have a skill set that meets the gap we've got. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. So this really goes back to what we were talking about before, that there's a solution to every problem. That if you have an interest in being involved in the life of CHF, please don't get stuck as something that looks like a hurdle. Reach out and check in, because we're really keen to hear from people. There are a certain set of things that are actually set out in our constitution that we look for when we're appointing board members. They include experience in the not-for-profit sector, or legal qualifications, or people who work as an accountant. More recently, we've talked about what's happening in the sort of consumer health environment and the health system environment more broadly, and what they might mean for CHF and the capability we need as a board. And some of the issues, you won't be surprised, AI, the digital world is completely transforming all of our engagement and all of our experience of healthcare. And there are enormous issues to navigate. So it's not even clear at this stage what all of them are. It's such a rapidly unfolding space with a lot of potential for good and a lot of potential for harm. So AI, technology, the digital world and digital health was one of the areas that had come up. Business acumen, people who know how to navigate an environment where you need the money in order to do the things that an organisation's there to do. Political networks and influence, finance capability, regulatory policy. I know that's not, it's a very, very specialist niche area that few people will necessarily have dived into. But those are some of the issues that have come up: AI, technology, regulatory policy, business experience, political networks and influencing, financial capability. But actually, there could be any number of other things where, if you have an interest, if you believe that the capabilities, the experience you have could really make a difference, we actually want to hear about that, because it may be that when we look at who you are and what you bring and why you're passionate about consumer health, we're able to immediately see, yes, that would actually really work for us, because that would bring something we don't have, or that would really complement some of the skills that are already available. So please don't be defined. Don't feel defined by anything that that might hold you back. We'd really prefer for you to step forward and let us know of your interest rather than anything else. And if you are an individual that's not connected to one of our member organisations, step forward, because we do elect directors through the AGM, through the nominations process, which we spoke about before. But we also have vacancies that occur on the board where we appoint people simply by knowing that a person has expressed interest, that they bring this kind of interest and capability to the board, and the board decides, yes, this is a person whose skills would be really valuable, and we will appoint them directly to the board. So, so knowing who you are and what interests you have is always valuable for us.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl.
Thanks, Daryl. That's really useful. And you partly answered the question too that Michelle and Chris had asked, which is what are the kinds of skills we're looking for? And I think you listed out there some of the things the board's thought about that might be good skill sets to have on the board. So there's some ideas there too. Tony, I'm going to come to you now, and with a question about new people. I think you addressed this in your opening remarks, but a couple of people said, what about if I've never been on a board? Perhaps I've been on senior committees, perhaps I'm early in my journey. What is it that I should have, or is this something I should maybe even go off and do in the next 12 months? Because remember, we have new positions every year. So how do I prepare myself to make a good application?
Yeah, very quickly, because I noticed we're getting close to time. Look, there's no hard and fast rule here. To be involved in committee work, whatever, it could be good grounding anyway. If we feel that people are going to bring a wealth of experience and knowledge in the health space, but not necessarily in the board space, we are more than prepared to provide opportunities for people through their time on the board. And not everyone comes with years of experience behind them. We all start somewhere, and we're open to that. One of the things that I didn't say is that, like a lot of boards, we're an aging board. We need younger people. And if we need younger people, they may not necessarily come with a lot of experience on boards or even on committees. But if they come with the right mindset and a good understanding and application, then we'd look very happy to look at people with that. And some of the skill set stuff, I think we would be really happy to have people who understand government and have networks through government. That would be a good thing. And given the changing scene in government with a new elected government and new portfolios, we're learning about those, and if we can tap into people who've got knowledge around that stuff, that would be really useful.
Great. So Tony, we're just at the finishing time now. We've hopefully answered as many questions as we could in the time, but as you've probably got a sense, our board's pretty approachable. So if you've got questions, feel free to reach out and we can direct them to board directors with particular questions you have. Tony, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, very quickly, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your great questions. And as Elizabeth said, if you want to reach out and have a conversation, please do so. Happy to chat. All of us are happy to chat. So thank you. Been a very informative evening, I think. And hopefully we'll see you in the future. Thank you.